Yeah, with this stream, I want to open it up by stating with it, anybody that can, please consider donating to my Patreon. Entering the address in right now into the chat. For anybody entering in, you'll probably see that right into the chat. And we're going to get back onto topic. You'll probably see on this topic you'll probably see 3 different names on it. We're first going to go into the idea of the first one, Alex Jones' appearance on Joe Rogan. Now, if we see on Twitter, you're going to see he's a major topic that's been trending, and that's something that needs to be noted. That's when we look at Twitter with it, we see that if he's trending, this should be a major noted point. That if he's trending, this should be something that is something that needs to be understood. That he should be considered one of their major investment points for their actual company itself, and this is something that they are ignoring. And I think this is something that they have ignored for a while, and they should understand that the organization of a company is to earn money itself, and they've ignored that whole point. And I think that this is not what they're looking at, and they're ignoring that whole fact. And this is something that we can actually see with the actual podcast itself. When we're looking, and it's not just Twitter itself, it's off of Facebook, it's off of these other servers. We're seeing the fact is that he is earning a bunch of money for the actual for what would be for the viewership on Rogan, because we know if he's trending, we know that's an actual factor of what's creating a lot of revenue for Rogan, for his podcast, because the more people are watching, the more interesting it is for advertisers. They want more interesting guests on there, because that means more people are getting access to hearing about their products, which means it's more people are going to be having access to the products that are going to be purchased. And this is how advertising works. They frankly don't care about the actual content of the actual guests or the actual person itself. They really, as long as a person is not adding to content that would be either have a legal liability that would be a problem, or an actual problem with the liability when it comes to something that would be conduct with showing underage content that would be almost on the borderline of legal liability. Frankly, they really don't care. Because they understand that they understand on the from the Supreme Court level, there is no such thing as hate speech and these other points. And it doesn't matter how much a legacy media corporation whines about being confronted about slander, when you try to slander the actual guest, that doesn't count as being, as they don't care about bullying on that with it. They really don't care. They only care about their money, what money's being generated. So frankly, when you start pulling off these people, it's not beneficial to the actual sites themselves. This is where we get to politics over what's actually beneficial to the actual company itself. And this is why what we're getting at these companies is people who are not considering their best interest. Now, why is Alex Jones actually trending? Well, this is showing that people, regardless of actual political ideology, are viewing the idea of free speech above all else. They'd rather see people out there. They know that it's actually dangerous to put people in the dark. Regardless if you actually support him or not on his beliefs, you know that it's actually safer to pull people out of the dark and let them speak their piece, because they're actually going to become less popular. The more you put them in the dark, the more popular they become. This is just a fact. We see this just within like the when you see prohibition on anything. Prohibition on alcohol, look what happened. It became more and more popular. More and more people were drinking amounts of alcohol. It became a huge problem. It became an underground thing with criminals, and thus they realized it was a bigger problem from doing this, and they bucked the actual trend from what the progressives were actually pushing for, because the progressives were saying it was going to lead to the downfall of society. And that's why they did that. Now, the same idea was happening with the war on drugs. You still had the people that were on the left wing that were pushing for the war on drugs because they knew it would have a racial outcome. That's why they pushed for it, and actually came out of the UN and as a UN agenda. And when they pushed through it, the outcome was obviously, as they expected, a racial outcome, because of where the highest areas were going to be targeted, because the most users were going to be targeted in the urban areas, where most of these were most likely these areas were going to be more likely to be poor. They were going to be attacked, and these people, they were going to be less likely to afford better people to defend them against these attacks from the police. Were basically going to be minorities, such that minorities were going to be going to prison. Those in the suburbs, there were users were less likely to be going after, because the idea of putting a war on the drugs in the suburbs would have been a waste of money, because they have limited resources. Since the urban areas have much more resources to play with, they're going to have more likely to spend this money and do this, and because they had no problem wasting this money. Now, this is why when we see this application to free speech, when you start doing this, people are going to start going in the dark, and they're going to create a larger problem than really exists. People are going to be more apt to of opinions that maybe you don't like or consider more extreme, are going to be more apt to be in the dark, going to become more popular. Well, if you want to essentially make them less popular, you need to essentially create a national debate on these. The only way you get a national debate is allow everybody to debate their own opinion. It's real simple. It's not very hard to realize this. And the more you get them out there, the more it's going to be. And frankly, when you start to realize his opinions are not really that extreme. Okay, he's very, very boastful in how he approaches his opinions. Yes, I will agree with that. But the fact is, his opinions are not as extreme as they make them out to be. What needs to be understood is that the opinions of such people as Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are actually highly extremist and highly insane. And when those are viewed as norm, I mean, these are the ones that are actually viewed as quite insane out there, when they're pushing for ideas of really democide and saying that you shouldn't have kids because, and they cite global warming as an idea when there is no global warming. I mean, just within right now, within the next 3 days, we're exactly supposed to get in my region the coldest. 3 days from now, we're supposed to get the coldest day on temperature recorded. That's not global warming. We see that they try to change between the terms of global warming and climate change. Now they do this with it because the fact is they know that the models don't work. Now the reason why they use these changes in models is because of the idea is that they can't do it because the science doesn't match. and so they have to change it around. When we look at all of the models, we see nothing is warming, because we look at the way energy moves. It can't just keep moving back and forth. It's going to either move one way or the other from that one type of stimulus. Either they need to either prove carbon acts as a stimulus for warming, or carbon acts as a stimulus for cooling. It can't act as both. And when we see this from these people, we need to understand that they're utterly insane. And that's basically when they're pushing these ideas, is that they're pushing for ideas of population reduction. That's an insane idea, and that's talking about killing people. That's the only thing it's talking about. It's talking about actually killing people. And that's the process of someone that would be an insane dictator and murderer. That's on the level of what Mao has done. That's on the level of Stalin has done. That's on the level of what Pol Pot has done. That's on the level of what Hitler has done. And yet we're treating these people like they're actually sane people. They're not. They're actually on the equivalent of murderous dictators, but they don't have the power currently. These are the same people that would basically, if they had the power, they would basically, of the state, they would actually turn it on their own people and execute them, or use the power of the government to essentially go around the globe and start executing people, because they just don't match up to what they want. And that's what we're talking about here. They would essentially say, if you don't match up to our ideals, we'll execute you because of your ideas of not wanting to essentially slaughter people. We have people like Al Gore that say there's too many people in Africa. You know what that means? That means we need to kill people in Africa. This is basically where this ideology comes from. And they use non-scientific terms such as consensus. There's no such thing as scientific consensus. I hate to tell you, people. Now, that's why when we talk about people, like when they say Alex Jones is some kind of wacko extremist, he's really not. He's doing nothing but putting their own ideas right back at them and just repeating what these people are saying. Now, when we go to the idea of we're going to go to the idea of the Michael Cohen hearing. Now, the Michael Cohen hearing actually brings up some quite interesting points. Now, first, I want to bring up the idea of when he states that he was essentially acting always in the president's favor. Now, this is something a little bit suspicious. We're looking at Michael Cohen. Now, if he was acting always in the president's favor, explain the Billy Bush tape. Now, the Billy Bush tape is something that's very, very suspicious. Now, he was supposed to be, now he validates himself as working for the president well after the election. Now, if this is essentially true, then he was still under contract with him at the time of the Billy Bush tape. And if he's supposed to essentially stop any type of destructive media from going after the president at this time, then the Billy Bush tape should have been essentially stopped well before this even hit. Why did we have that even be released? This makes me believe that he's highly suspect in his actual activities. And this is where we get to describing him as being more political than anything else. Is that he was just looking for basically a couple women came in, tried to just extort money. He says, okay, I'll deal with it. President goes, okay, deal with it. Then he does with it. And this is all the president's having him do. Now, when it comes down to other factors, Democrats go, okay, this must be his signature. Now, this is another major point that needs to be known. If you look at the way the signature is signed, it doesn't exactly appear to the way he has signed his signature for bills. Looks completely different. Now, this is a major point. Why does it look different? Why does it look quasi-similar but still a little bit different? Now, anybody who's actually ever collected autographs would know something specific with this. There are actually making autograph machines called AutoPen. These are basically where it automatically signs. Basically, you essentially make a random signature on something on a computer, and it actually is a machine that actually copies it on multiple things. Now, this is perfectly legal to do. You can do this for checks. Many people throughout, and there's even machines that have been able to do it throughout history. And I've done this. This is why for even some people even in like the 50s and 60s, there have actually been machines going that far back of actually AutoPen machines. Now you have to go. Most of the AutoPen machines now are done digitally, so you have to be very, very careful with when you get autographs of some of these celebrities to make sure that they're not AutoPen. Now, a lot of people have actually been tricked thinking that they are legitimate because they're made with an actual pen or marker, like permanent marker, and this is a major problem. So when we look at that, we can tell that that is not his original signature, being that it does not resemble the same signature that we see on the bills that he has signed. It is completely different. Now, this is a problem, meaning that there's going to be slight differences between an AutoPen and an AutoPen machine and what his actual hand's going to do. His hand's going to be slightly different than what that's going to do because there's going to be slightly different motions. You usually have wider swoops on an AutoPen machine, which is usually what you tend to notice. And this is something because they can't move as tightly on these machines as what the hand can do, because the hand is controlling the pen directly, and it's not controlling it through an actual mechanical arm that's locking in the pen. So when it's doing the signing, so what ends up happening is when we see these checks, that's most often what's happening. Very likely is the check never even the check was an AutoPen, and most likely was just sitting right there in Cohen's office, and it was basically just Trump giving the authorization for these checks to be signed. Never actually was signed actually at the from President Trump himself, just given the authorization, which means that he's not giving each authorization, but rather giving a general authorization to basically make this extortion artist go away. So this person doesn't bring whatever fake accusation or whatever accusation to the general public. And this is what happens when you get a lot of people that are dragging these things out that could come to the public. And that's what ends up happening. And when he's saying that it happened for a lot longer than the actual point, that's quite suspect, because it wouldn't have been likely that he would have done this before running for president, because it would make no sense. He would essentially bought the person out to just essentially stop the actual thing beforehand, and would have picked an actual full out amount instead of doing it through individual payments. It wouldn't have made sense otherwise. The individual payments would have made sense if this allegation would have been made directly before the actual would have been made after he started running for president, which would have made sense with Avenatti representing one of the clients, and to essentially extort money from the president, or the then candidate running for president, I should say. And that's another problem that we see. Now when we look at another thing is we see that he actually made Cohen actually made blind accusations over race on Trump. Now, when we actually look at this, now this doesn't really make much sense, because if he were actually racist, where does this evidence come from? You would think that if he were racist, the actual hires within his group of who he's actually put in would have actually not made much sense for who he's put in his cabinet, who he's actually kept on within his team. And surely his son-in-law would not have married Ivanka. He would have actually said, I'm not going to allow my daughter to allow her to marry a Jewish man. If this were basically if he were bigoted in any way, he would have basically stood in the way and said, no way in hell is this happening. And that would have definitely hit the news. And then she wouldn't have ended up marrying him. The other point is, if you look at the White House chef, he would have never retained Chris Comerford, who is a Filipina chef, as a White House chef, who is the only White House chef in the history of the country who has ever done the work as the head chef of the White House for 3 different presidents, if he was actually racist or bigoted. Now, this is what needs to be understood. That means this actual accusation being leveled by Cohen and being leveled by the Democrats, that it's been leveled by several Democrats, is basically completely illegitimate. I mean, you have Lynn Patton has actually gone on the actual record to state that he is not racist. You actually have also the fact is you have Chris Comerford has never raised an issue with him. You would think the White House chef would essentially raise an issue saying there's a serious problem with this. This is both a woman and a woman who is also an immigrant, came here as an immigrant, as a Filipina immigrant. You think that she would basically have a serious problem with him if he was racist or if he was a misogynist or something like that. You think she would have a serious problem with that and say, you know what, I can't work here anymore. Not a thing coming up. You think one of these things would come up. And this is where we actually see these blind attacks with it, and it shows that Cohen is really just looks more like he's trying to get out of jail, which is why when we look at Cohen, he spoke with the Mueller investigation seven times. This shows like he's trying to get a get out of jail free card, because he's trying to make up whatever type of story he can. Now, when we see, now we're going to go on to the actual third story of this. Now, Juan Williams being threatened basically be booted by off the 5. Now, this is based on, when we look at this is pretty much based on the case of where he was pretty much going off the handle and going off on a basic tangent on the 5 today because of the case of the of what he did is basically he's basically calling for is basically what he was doing was basically calling for stuff that was kind of insane on the show and is causing a little bit of a problem. and eventually you knew it was going to essentially cause an issue that there was eventually going to come up because of his liberal leanings, and basically he was going to cause a blow up. Now, Juan usually what it called has usual disagreements, but the fact is he needs to understand that you need to stay within reason and state things within facts and stop getting off of the rail on feelings, because the fact is in the end you need to state things on facts. And I think this is where Juan gets off of bases. And really, Gutfeld is not usually one you're gonna get into arguments with, and frankly, that's not usually going to happen. That's if you get into an argument with him, that's really kind of insane. You might get into arguments with other people on the panel, but frankly, if you get into an argument with him, you've really kind of gone overboard. And that's usually when Williams kind of goes way overboard. Williams needs to understand why he's kind of gotten a welcoming home there at Fox to begin with. That was because NPR kicked him off for actually dare uttering the raise Islamic terrorism. The moment that he did that, NPR and these other liberal stations kicked him out for actually daring to utter that phrase. So basically, he needs to understand that he got that for actually uttering a fact. And when it comes down to it is, if he's going to go on feelings with it and start going back in this liberal direction and pandering to liberals, he's not going to find a friendly home elsewhere. He's not going to find anywhere else that he can go, and these other areas are not going to be friendly to him, because he's already burned his bridge with them by not pandering to them and not pandering to this idea of feelings over facts. Because the fact is that that's the way things go with them. They don't want facts. Even when it comes to AOC, AOC says she just want to get bogged down in focusing on facts. She'd rather focus on these ideas of feelings, and this is the one they embrace. And it should show you that that's the whole idea. And if he wants to essentially do this, he's going to have to get back to reality, and he can focus on a liberal spectrum, but he's going to have to use the facts to argue his case and not try to basically go to this idea of feelings on these things. And you cannot go with any idea of feelings on anything to argue your case against Trump being racist, because there's no legitimate case. Because when it comes down, there's no legitimate evidence that proves that he is racist or bigoted, because you can say, a lot of times people say, oh, but he didn't rent to this group of people. Well, when you start to say, were they actually economically a good investment? Well, if you can't prove that they are, then that doesn't validate them as being a good person to rent to, because if you don't, you can't say, well, he should rent to them anyway. Well, if they're not likely to essentially be a good value for his money, he shouldn't be renting to them. If there's a potential that they're not going to pay bills month to month, then it doesn't matter what race they are. They could be white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, whatever they are. It really does not matter. You don't rent to someone who's going to be a bad patron and not pay back the thing and keep up the rental space that you're doing for your high-rise place, because frankly, we know that there's a bunch of people of all types that actually rent in his buildings. I know Montel Williams is one that rents in one of his buildings, and frankly, he's not saying, hey, you can't live here anymore because you're black. He doesn't make that statement. When it comes down to it, he doesn't care as long as you can pay the money. and that's the only factor, is he wants to make sure that they're able to financially afford the payments. And this is what it comes down to, is when it comes down to these things, is you can't prove Trump as racist or bigoted because of these points. And the fact is back when Trump was a Democrat, they weren't arguing these points. So when Cohen or the Democrats are trying to argue these points, there is no facts to back up their accusations. And when we go back to the points of Juan Williams needs to understand what are his best ways to make a persuasive argument. You're not going to make a persuasive argument in any such way when you start acting irrationally. And when it comes to the 5 with it, okay, you're going to get neoconservatives on there with it that you're probably going to clash with. Yes, that's understandable. But when you get people like that are more lighthearted, like Greg Gutfeld, he's not going to be one you're likely to argue with and start getting to the point where it gets very, very heated. I mean, you might get lightly at the point with it, but it usually doesn't boil over. If it boils over, that's not likely to happen in many different cases. So I think that they need to look. So I think he needs to really look and start to examine how he actually approaches his appearances on these shows, and realize that he needs to do this because, I mean, he's had these actions where he's basically let his feelings get the best of him. He's done this when he's debated Michelle Malkin, claiming that she's not a real journalist. And he's acted completely irrational in that manner. And that's something that needs to stop happening, because if he keeps doing this, he's not going to have a home whatsoever, because when you go and you basically tell the truth on the tell any lines of truth on these liberal stations, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, all these other ones, they don't want you there. They just frankly don't want you there, because that's not welcome. Frankly, you're probably not going to find a spot on RT, because they're not going to want you to have any blow-ups at any of their other guests for citing the truth. They don't want that. They want you to actually keep your composure, and they don't want you insulting other guests, so they're not going to want you there. And he's going to basically find himself without a home, and he's going to find himself in that situation where he has no place to go. So he's basically going to have to work himself from the ground up with no freaking network. And when you have no network, and you're not really considered a major personality, you can't do that. He's not to the level of like a Bill O'Reilly that is a major personality that could do this. So when it comes down to it, is he should basically start cooling his jets and start acting a lot more rationally, start bringing facts to the table, and realize you can bring facts to the table from the left-handed spectrum. From the left-sided spectrum, I should say, because there's always going to be some method you can do it. You can state from facts from the left-wing spectrum easily, from almost every issue. It's basically from a war type of issue with it. You can always bring the point of non-intervention. From the aspect of poor people, you could always bring some type of aspect of many different points of view. So, and you can try to cite something from fact. So, there's many people that have done it. When you look at people like Dennis Kucinich, he's left wing, and he can bring actually stuff with fact without acting irrational. Now, there's going to be certain points that people like me disagree with him on, and certain areas that I agree with him on with it. But he does this with actually bringing facts to the table and brings it in a very, very rational manner. And there's ways to do this in a very, very neutral manner that I think are actually smart. And this is something that I think Juan Williams could actually do. And I think he would actually raise his star power. But until he does that, he's going to be stuck in a place where he's going to be at a place where no one's really going to want him if he keeps doing this. And he's not going to have much more time to play until then, because frankly he's not a well enough name that people are going to say, wow, it's Juan Williams, I would love to have him, because frankly he kind of PO'd the left-wing groups where they just don't want him. And that's something of all the left-wing channels, because of what he uttered on calling these Islamic terror groups, and that really made them mad. When you do that, they're going to say you're not welcome. When you start to act irrationally, you're going to find that groups like RT America are going to say, we don't want you blowing up at our other guests and acting irrational, or blowing up at a host for bringing up something that you don't want to hear about. So you're not going to be welcome, because we don't want some irrational activity just on one specific moment. And then when it comes down, so he's stuck at Fox, and he's going to have to act rationally if he wants to actually make some money, because he's not going to make it on his own. It's frankly the truth. He doesn't have the highlight on his own to actually make it or go anywhere. And that's what he needs to understand. And this is basically it, what he needs to grasp. And until he grasps this, he's going to be kind of SOL. Now, if you like this, I know this is kind of a little bit odd type of nightly stream, but it's going to be kind of like this is kind of the way the news kind of came in with it. It was kind of a few different pieces. But if you like it, click the notification bell and subscribe to the page if you're not subscribed yet. If you're not a patron, please subscribe to my Patreon. The link's right below here, and I'd really appreciate any type of donation you give. And please think about doing that. And that's basically about it. Bye everyone for the night. Tomorrow is going to be the podcast on the 7th Amendment. Then we're going to go 7th, 8th, 9th, and then 10th. Then after that, it will be the Article 1 through 3, and then going to what an Article 5 convention goes after that. Then I'll probably figure out where we're going to go from there for the actual future podcast, and I'll figure what we do from there. That's about it. Bye everyone.